testing, performance testing. Another type of testing that I see out there, and I'll call it testing, is a lot of times we have external groups that do the user interface design or the UX portion of this, right? And unfortunately, they have veto power quite often as well. And so what we really want to do is put those people in the mix so that they're involved as we're building the application again, because the alternative is that we deliver the application, it goes out, it has a chance to move backwards in the value stream again. In other words, it goes to somebody to look at, nope, that's not it, and has to move back. So the same way that we're trying to move as much of the testing into development at development time, I would also try to move those sort of tests into development, i.e., have that person come down and set with the developer right as the developer's finishing up the card and verify that it's right. And if it's not, fix it right there. So we become more efficient by doing those. But the other sort of complexity, and if I'm understanding your question, like, you know, we're talking about chaos complexity. Yeah, that's not where we want to focus our automation efforts.
So you're saying you can't get 0 defects. You can get 99.99%.
I think we can get really close. I think we can get really close. But there are some things, sometimes our mind can't grapple the interaction of a lot of objects, a lot of different things. We can get, yeah, I think we can get the bulk of them. And the ones that sneak through are the obscure ones. I saw a hand back here, yes.
Can we go back to that slide where you had those different application domains?
Yes. Is there a question here?
Yes.
Oops. Oh, man. Hang on. Oops. Oh. I will get it. iPhone app. That was the last one.
So you're saying in all these different application domains, you're able to automate?
What I am saying is that we have had people who have worked in one way or another, and actually even a lot more than these domains. Nearly every client that I've walked into for the last 2 years, they've said, oh, we can't test our app because of this. And in every case, it really hasn't been a problem to find a way to do this. So I had somebody I was talking to this morning that had a unique situation that I'd love to try to tackle, where they had like a Java applet, a big applet that was loading into a browser, and the whole application was running like that, and they weren't able to find a way. And there might be cases out there, but
Can you maybe briefly mention, like, for batch and the bulk mail system type stuff, what kind of tools you use for the automation
the batch,
and the mail system?
okay. Well, the batch system that is there was not, I know when you're saying batch, I'm guessing that you're probably talking about like a COBOL mainframe-based system. Is that right?
Either that or even distributed ones, but something that runs as a batch.
Okay, so let's talk about what a batch system does. A batch system usually has a set of inputs. It runs through, does some processing, and there's a set of outputs. Now, whether those on both ends is a database structure, flat file, maybe it's getting its source from external XML, who knows what it might be, but it's getting a stream of data, it's running through a process, when it's done, it's producing something. That's not a hard paradigm to automate things at all. So what makes it difficult is whenever we have situations where the data requirements are huge, right?
Some states change in between, right?
What's that?
Some of the state of the data would change in between of that process.
The state of the data would change. Yeah, that's what the batch app does, right? It changes the data. And that's all we need to verify. So, oops. Need to verify we don't get wrapped around a chair. Batch apps is like one of the simplest things in the world to test, automate, because we know by the definition what the input is and what the expected output is. So the challenge in handling batch applications is the large amount of data that we have to deal with. And there's actually simple patterns to help us handle that as well. You know, once we understand that for one specific test, the majority of the data is completely irrelevant, and that there usually is only a small finite piece of data that affects any given business rule, then we can ignore most of the remaining pieces of the data. Yeah, we still have to provide something, but we can provide a much smaller, simpler input run the process, and have a much simpler, smaller output, because we're not testing on a batch application the entire application. We're testing individual rules. How are they applied?
Well, right after this, we went into things like, rather than Java and C#, we use some of the dynamic language. And then that's where it got to me.
Okay. I'd like to talk to you more about the batch application. Why don't you come see me after the presentation and we can jump into that some more? Okay.
What about the mailing system?
Talk to me about that as well. Actually, talk to Joel. Are you here? That's the guy to talk to about the mailing system. Yes.
You talked about how we need to layer our tests in the same manner that we do our applications.
Yes.
To make them more testable.
Mhm.
Resources to point us towards to find out how to layer our tests.
Unfortunately, most of the examples that are out on the web suck really bad because they don't do that at all, right? And so that's the challenge that we're faced with right now. I've written about it a little bit. I know a lot of others have as well. The resource that you need to help you with that sits right next to you day in and day out, the developers on your team. And they're doing it every day in their application. So one thing that I can suggest is to try to pair with them and have them help you understand how to build up those layers and those encapsulations to help you absorb the change much simpler. If you don't have that kind of relationship, you might find it amazing that if you ask them to come over and teach you something, that they just might be willing to do that. I don't know. I've written about it a little bit on my blog. You can go out to cheezyworld.com and see what I had to say. But that Cheezy guy, he's pretty radical. I wouldn't trust most of what he has to say. Actually, I think my blog's up here. Yep, there it is. I don't have any great resources for you, but I have heard a rumor that there's going to be a book out this year sometime, maybe, if I can get around to it, that will talk about this some. Yes?
I have a question. Just trying to understand, when you have the continuous collaboration with APD, is that pretty much user acceptance at that point?
Just because you have collaboration doesn't mean you're doing acceptance test-driven development. Acceptance test-driven development is, in its purest form, you think of two test loops that get built as we're developing software. The outer loop is where we're specifying the functionality and we're collaborating across the team to kind of define that and to automate that. The inner loop is the developer who's actually test driving their code to kind of make those other tests pass. And I think it's only whenever you achieve that you can really say, yes, we're doing acceptance test-driven development. Now, I've heard people say, we do acceptance test-driven development, but we don't automate anything. And for me, that doesn't feel like we're test-driving anything. For me, that almost feels like we're trying to write better specifications.
I had a follow-up question.
Yes.
So when you said you're done, like when your acceptance criteria is met, then you're done.
Yep.
So then when it goes into production, does any change or defect in production really a deviation to requirement, or is it a defect?
Can you repeat the question, please?
The question she's asked is, so all of our acceptance tests pass, the application goes to production, and we find a defect. Is that truly a defect, or is that a new requirement? It's a good question, thanks. The term defect is really loose, so let me kind of dice it up a little bit. So if there is some functionality that we expect to be in the system, but it's not there, in other words, if we think that we've missed a requirement, I wouldn't call that a defect, because the whole team was working under one set of assumptions, and they delivered based on that assumptions. Just because the assumptions change later on, or somebody after the fact comes back and said, no, I meant something totally different, we shouldn't really penalize the team because the team had all worked together, agreed upon what it was. They had the business involved in those decision-making processes, and they delivered based on that. So if that's the case, then I would say that that new idea, or that change in idea should be a new story. Now, if we go to production and the system crashes, I think that's an opportunity for the whole team to come together to say, what is it we have to do to make sure that this never happens again? In fact, for me, defects are that kind of an event. Anytime a defect goes beyond the team and goes out to a customer or out into production, and we learn about it, we need to stop and say, how did that happen? What was it what breakdown did we have in our way that we're working that allowed that to occur? And step back and say, let's put things in place, if at all possible, to keep that from occurring again. So that would be a defect. And I think that is the team's responsibility. It's not the tester's responsibility or the developers, but it's the team's responsibility to address that. You had your hand up as well? Yes.